I still remember the night it began, the way one remembers an old bruise, pain forgotten, but never the place it once lived. The sky was heavy that evening, thick with clouds that hung low enough to touch the rooftops, swallowing every bit of moonlight. It was the kind of night when the world feels like it's holding its breath, waiting for something to break. I was returning home late from work, tired in the way that settles deep in the bones, the kind that makes the heart ache more than the body. The street was unusually quiet. Even the dogs didn't bark. The streetlights flickered with a faint electrical hum, the kind of sound that makes silence feel louder. And then I saw her. An old woman sitting on the steps of my front door. At first, I thought perhaps she was lost, or confused, or simply resting. The rain had fallen earlier, leaving the ground damp and shining, and her dress clung to her shape as though she'd been walking for hours. Her hands rested loosely in her lap, fingers interlaced, trembling slightly. Her head was bowed so low that I could not see her face. Something in me froze, not in fear, but in that strange instinct that whispers when the world is about to change. I stood still for a moment, gripping my bag to steady myself. The air felt colder suddenly, like winter had crept in through the night and wrapped its hands around my throat. Slowly, she lifted her head. Her face was lined with years that seemed carved, not simply aged. Her eyes, hollow with exhaustion, red with what looked like endless tears, met mine. There was something hauntingly familiar in them, though I could not place it. A softness. A longing. Something that ached against my ribs when I saw it. She looked at me the way a drowning person looks at land. And then she lowered her gaze again, as if ashamed to be seen. I felt something inside myself crumble, an emotion I could not name, but it tugged at me with a force I couldn't resist. I unlocked the door, stepped aside, and without a word, she crossed the threshold. It was strange, the moment she entered, the air shifted. As if the house itself recognized her. As if the walls had been waiting. She sat quietly on the old sofa near the window, hands still trembling, eyes lowered. She did not speak. She simply breathed, slow, heavy breaths, like someone trying not to fall apart. I could feel her sorrow filling the room like smoke. There is a kind of silence that feels peaceful, and there is silence that feels like grief. This silence felt like the second kind. I sat across the room, unsure whether to ask questions or wait. Something in her presence told me that words were fragile things, that if spoken too soon, they might shatter both of us. Minutes passed, maybe hours. Time had a strange way of bending around her, like it was waiting for permission to move. I studied her face, the deep creases around her mouth, the softness of her jaw, the faint tremble of her chin. There was a familiarity there that unnerved me. A strange connection that pressed against the back of my mind, like a memory trying to surface. And then, her eyes lifted again, and for a brief moment, I felt my heartbeat stutter. There was pain there. The kind that doesn't fade with time. The kind that reshapes a person completely. The kind only a mother knows. I don't know how I recognized it. But I did. Suddenly, the air inside the house felt too heavy to breathe. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to steady the shaking inside my chest. She reached into the pocket of her faded coat, her hands unsteady, the movement slow, deliberate, like lifting the weight of a lifetime with fingers that could barely hold anything anymore. She pulled out a small photograph. The edges were curled and soft from years of touching, the surface cracked like dried earth. She held it for a long moment before offering it to me, her eyes locked on my face with a plea so raw it stripped every defense I had ever built. When I looked down at the photograph, I felt the world tilt. Because the girl in that picture, smiling, small, dressed in a yellow dress, was me. My hands began to tremble so violently I nearly dropped the photograph. My breath caught somewhere between my lungs and my throat, refusing to move. No. It couldn't be. I had seen this girl 1,000 times in framed photos and dusty albums. I knew this face as well as I knew my own reflection. Because it was my own reflection. And yet, I had never seen this photograph before. My memory did not recognize the room behind me, did not recognize the hand holding mine in the picture, a woman's hand, young, gentle, protective. Not the mother I remembered. Because the mother I was told I had. The mother I grew up mourning. Had died when I was 3. Or so I believed. My knees weakened beneath me, and I sank into the nearest chair. The room spun, walls bending, floor tilting, everything collapsing inward like a dying star. My mind screamed, searching for logic, for explanation, for anything to hold on to. But all I could feel was the weight of an entire life shifting beneath my feet. The old woman watched me, not with expectation, not with the desperation of demanding belief, but with the quiet heartbreak of someone who had waited far too long to hope. I wanted to speak. I wanted to ask questions. I wanted to run. But my voice was gone, swallowed by the storm rising inside me. And then she did something that broke me completely. She reached out her hand, slowly, gently, the way a mother reaches toward a child afraid of the dark. Not forcing. Not claiming. Just offering. That simple gesture, fragile, trembling, aching with love, cut through me like a blade. Because somewhere deep inside, beneath all the years, beneath all the stories I thought I knew, beneath every carefully built wall, something inside me recognized her. Not by memory, but by blood. I don't remember standing. I don't remember walking to the window. I only remember the sound of my heartbeat, loud, wild, trembling like the wings of a trapped bird. The world outside blurred into rain and streetlights as I fought to breathe. I pressed my hands against the cold glass, trying to anchor myself to something real. But everything felt wrong. Everything felt like a lie. For 30 years, I had lived inside a story I believed was mine, a story I thought was complete. A mother lost in a tragic accident. A father who raised me alone. A childhood filled with grief wrapped in silence. I had grieved a woman I thought I had known. I had built my identity on the foundation of loss. But what if the foundation itself was false? Behind me, the old woman remained still, not moving, not approaching, not asking. As though she knew that even a breath too loud could break me. The letter was still in her lap, folded, worn, soft from being held too many times. I could see the edges of it trembling with the rhythm of her hands. And suddenly, I understood. She hadn't come to claim me. She hadn't come to explain herself. She hadn't come to rebuild something shattered. She had come because she was running out of time. There was something in the way her shoulders curved inward, the way her breath shook, not the weakness of age, but the exhaustion of someone who had carried the same grief for far too long. Someone who had searched without rest, without hope, without certainty. Someone who would have walked until her feet bled if it meant finding her child. The realization cracked me open. My throat tightened painfully, my chest heaved, and without sound, tears spilled down my face, hot, relentless, tasting of every year of emptiness I'd swallowed like stones. I turned toward her, but I still couldn't speak. Words felt too small for the earthquake tearing through me. She watched me with eyes that held the wreckage of a lifetime, eyes that had known loss deeper than death. And I understood something terrible and beautiful at once. I had never been abandoned. I had been searched for. Every year. Every day. Every breath. The truth hit me like a wave, heavy, cold, unstoppable. And all at once, the silence inside me cracked. I don't know how long I stood there, motionless, staring at nothing. Time felt like a glass jar dropped from someone's hands, shattering into 100 glittering pieces around me. Every fragment held a reflection of a life that suddenly no longer belonged to me. I wrapped my arms around myself, not to hold the pieces together, but simply to keep from collapsing under the weight of what I did not yet understand. Some griefs come like storms, loud, violent, tearing branches from trees and roofs from houses. But some arrive quietly. Soft as breath. Heavy as stone. Sinking slowly into the bones until standing feels like lifting mountains. That was the kind of grief that settled in me then. I walked slowly back toward the sofa, as though every step reshaped the ground beneath my feet. The woman sat completely still, her hands resting gently in her lap, fingers twisted together the way a frightened child might grip a blanket. There was no accusation in her posture. No demand. Just a quiet surrender, the kind of surrender that only comes when every battle has already been lost. She lifted her eyes to meet mine, and in them I saw the storm of years that had lived inside her. Years of searching, of walking roads with blistered feet, of asking strangers at train stations and hospitals, of praying to ceilings that refused to answer. I had spent my life grieving a mother who did not die. She had spent hers grieving a daughter who did not know she was lost. I lowered myself into the chair across from her, my body shaking with the kind of tremor that begins in the soul and rises outward like a quake. I held the photograph in my hands as if it were the fragile spine of my history, and I traced my own small face with trembling fingertips, as if hoping that touching it might return what time had stolen. Suddenly, it occurred to me that somewhere there must be memories I once had that were taken from me, early ones, first ones, the foundational stones of identity. The sound of a lullaby. The warmth of arms wrapped around me. The scent of a mother's hair. And yet all I remembered were blank spaces, shadows, blurry fragments that never connected. No wonder my childhood felt unfinished. No wonder there had always been a quiet ache beneath my ribs, a hunger I never understood. It had been the shape of a hand I had forgotten, but my heart had not. I pressed the photo to my chest and closed my eyes, letting the truth destroy me gently. The tears that came were different this time, not the sudden shock of discovery, but the deep, wrenching sorrow of a wound that had been bleeding for a lifetime without knowing its name. I cried for the mother I thought I lost. I cried for the mother I never knew I had. I cried for the years that could never be returned, years that stretched between us like a canyon carved by time and silence. And beneath the grief, like a faint heartbeat, something else stirred. Recognition. Belonging. A thread pulling me toward her, fragile but unbreakable. I opened my eyes slowly. The woman still sat there, watching me with the stillness of someone afraid to hope. Her hands trembled slightly, not from age, but from the sheer power of holding herself together. And I realized something then that hollowed and rebuilt me all at once. I was not the only one with shattered pieces lying at my feet. There were pieces of her scattered across the same floor. Two broken women sitting in the same quiet room, breathing the same heavy air, tethered by a bond neither of us fully remembered, but both of us felt. The silence finally gave way to the sound of my own breathing, uneven, jagged, but real. And in that moment, I understood. Maybe healing does not begin with answers. Maybe it begins with presence, with two hearts acknowledging the ruins between them and choosing to stand among the wreckage together. Healing is not a sudden sunrise. It is the slow turning of the earth toward a light we have not yet seen. And something inside me, something small and fragile and long buried, turned slightly toward that light. Not forgiveness. Not acceptance. Not understanding. Just the willingness to stay. That was enough for now. That night felt endless. The hours stretched thin, suspended between what was known and what was not yet spoken. The old woman remained seated in silence, her hands still folded on her lap, as if afraid that loosening her grip would release everything she had held inside for a lifetime. And I sat across from her, clutching the photograph like a lifeline, my gaze fixed on the small girl smiling from another world. The rain outside softened gradually, falling now in gentle whispers against the glass, almost tender, like hands smoothing tangled hair. I tried to search my memory, reaching deep into the earliest dark places inside my mind, hoping to find even a flicker of her, a face, a voice, the scent of her skin. But all I found were shadows. Blurred fragments. The echo of something just beyond reach. Memory is a strange thing. It does not disappear, it simply hides, waiting for the heart to be strong enough to look. For a long time I believed I had lost nothing. Now I understood I had lost everything without ever knowing. The pain of realizing what had been stolen burned through me so sharply that for a moment I pressed a hand to my chest, as though trying to hold my heart in place. All I could think was, How many nights had she sat awake, waiting? How many birthdays passed with candles burning for someone who never came? How many prayers broke inside her mouth? And perhaps worst of all, how did she keep living with a wound that never closed? The more I looked at her, the more I understood. Her body carried the map of her suffering, the curve of her spine bending beneath the weight of years she could not set down. Her silence was not emptiness. It was the sound of someone who had said all her words into the dark long ago, until nothing remained but breath. I felt the beginnings of understanding grow roots inside me, tender but fierce. The woman lifted her hands slightly, almost imperceptibly, as though the movement itself cost strength she barely had. Her eyes held a softness that broke me open again, not pleading, not demanding, just a quiet, trembling wish. See me. Not what I lost. Me. And suddenly, I felt something shift inside, a door opening, not fully, not loudly, but enough to let light in. I saw not a stranger. Not a trespasser in the night. Not a ghost from another life. I saw a mother. A mother who had walked through fire. A mother who had crossed miles and decades with nothing but hope. A mother who had finally arrived, not to reclaim, but simply to witness. My chest ached with the bittersweet truth that pressed into me from all sides. She had not come to ask for anything. Not love. Not forgiveness. Not explanation. She had come for a single moment. One glimpse, one breath, one heartbeat of her child alive. She had come to say goodbye. The realization struck so sharply that I felt the air leave my lungs. I looked at her again, really looked, and I saw the tiredness beneath her skin, the subtle gray around her lips, the faint tremble in her shoulders. This was not the exhaustion of travel. This was the exhaustion of someone whose body was reaching its final winter. She hadn't found me because she had strength left to search. She found me because she had almost none left. The truth settled over me like snowfall, quiet, cold, devastating. Time was not on our side. And suddenly, every year we had lost crashed over me like a wave breaking against stone. All the moments we would never reclaim. The memories we would never share. The childhood that would never be returned. Grief did not ask permission that it ripped through me like a storm tearing through trees. My tears fell silently, but inside, my soul was screaming. I wanted to reach across the space between us. I wanted to take her hands, those worn, trembling hands that had never stopped searching. I wanted to press them against my face and let time collapse. But I did not move. Because something inside me, something raw and terrified, held me back. The fear that touching her would make the truth too real, too final, too unchangeable. I sat with the photograph pressed against my heart, tears falling soundlessly into my lap. And somewhere deep inside me, beneath the grief and shock and trembling disbelief, a quiet voice whispered. Do not let this moment end the way time has ended everything else. Not again. Sleep did not come that night. The darkness lay thick in every corner of the house, pressing heavily against the windows, as though the night itself was grieving. I sat in the armchair near the old woman, watching the slow rise and fall of her breath, fragile, uneven, like the tide trying to return after too many storms that I wanted to press them against my face and let time collapse. But I did not move. Because something inside me, something raw and terrified, held me back. The fear that touching her would make the truth too real, too final, too unchangeable. I sat with the photograph pressed against my heart, tears falling soundlessly into my lap. And somewhere deep inside me, beneath the grief and shock and trembling disbelief, a quiet voice whispered. Do not let this moment end the way time has ended everything else. Not again. Sleep did not come that night. The darkness lay thick in every corner of the house, pressing heavily against the windows, as though the night itself was grieving. I sat in the armchair near the old woman, watching the slow rise and fall of her breath, fragile, uneven, like the tide trying to return after too many storms. Moonlight spilled across her face in thin strands, revealing the quiet exhaustion etched into the lines around her eyes. Her hands rested loosely at her sides now, palms open, as if finally releasing something she had held too tightly for too long. It struck me then, the posture of surrender. Not the surrender of defeat, but the surrender of acceptance. As though she had come not expecting to be welcomed, not expecting joy or reunion, but simply hoping to be seen before she vanished from this world. And I wondered how many nights she had slept on cold steps outside strangers' doors, waiting for a miracle that refused to come. How many times had she walked away unseen, unheard, untouched? The thought carved into me like a blade. The photograph lay in my lap, and I traced the tiny details on it. The sunlight falling on my small face, the yellow dress patterned with small blue flowers, the way the young woman beside me, this same woman now sleeping in my living room, held my hand gently yet protectively, as though she knew even then how precious and brief that moment would be. The longer I stared, the more I felt something shift inside me. The faint echo of a memory stirring like a leaf beneath water. A scent. Wildflowers. Wind brushing through tall grass. A lullaby I did not recognize but felt I had once known by heart. It flickered and disappeared, but left behind a burning ache. The ache of something once loved deeply, now unreachable. Why had I never asked more questions? Why had I lived so easily inside the story others gave me? Why had I never noticed the empty space inside me that I worked so hard to pretend wasn't there? Answers moved like shadows at the edges of my mind, refusing to stay long enough to take shape. Across the room, the woman shifted slightly, her breath catching for a moment. The softest sound escaped her, not a word, not even a sound recognizable, just the trembling release of a heart breaking quietly in its sleep. It shattered something inside me. I stood slowly and walked to the kitchen for water, though thirst wasn't what drove me. I needed movement. I needed something solid to hold. I needed the cold of the glass in my hand to remind me that the world still existed beneath the weight of everything that had changed. But even there, in the dim doorway, I could still feel her presence, like a shadow stitched to mine. This was not a coincidence. Life does not simply place strangers at your doorstep carrying photographs of your childhood. There were truths buried beneath this, truths that needed to be dug up no matter how deeply they were buried. And no matter how much digging might hurt. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, each second falling like a stone into the silence between us. Time had stolen too much already. It would not steal this night as well. When I returned to the room, she was awake, sitting upright, hands clasped tightly together, her eyes fixed on something only she could see. Her gaze looked far beyond the walls of my home, deep into places no one else could follow. And in that moment, without words, I felt it. The opening of a door inside both of us. Whatever came next would change everything. Part 6, What Was Taken. Morning arrived slowly, the first threads of light slipping through the curtains like hesitant fingers. The world outside seemed softer, washed clean by the night's rain. But inside the house, the air remained heavy, thick with truth unspoken. The old woman sat quietly, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea she hadn't truly touched. Her shoulders were drawn in, as though bracing against a storm no one else could see. I sat across from her again, still unable to force words through the tightness in my throat. Silence stretched long between us, deep, fragile, trembling under its own weight. But it was not empty. Silence, I realized, holds truth when words are too small for what needs saying. For a long time, I simply watched her. The way her breath stuttered sometimes, the way her fingers tightened around the cup as if she feared it might slip away. Someone who must have rewritten the truth with careful, practiced hands. Someone who needed me to never ask why. My father. The realization struck like lightning, bright, violent, undeniable. I felt my breath vanish, my skin go cold, my heartbeat stutter painfully. He had not been a grieving husband raising a child alone. He had been something else entirely. A man with something to hide. A man who had taken something that was never his to take. A man who built a life on a lie so heavy it buried every truth beneath it. And suddenly everything made sense. The silence around my past. The questions always brushed aside. The way he changed the subject whenever my mother's name was spoken. The way my memories never stretched back far enough. He had not rescued me. He had stolen me. The photograph trembled in my hands as the full weight of it slammed into me. My identity had never been mine. My childhood had never been mine. My life had been built on the bones of someone else's grief. A sound escaped me, raw, broken. And the old woman flinched, her own tears gathering but not falling. Her hands tightened in her lap, fingers twisting painfully together, knuckles white. I realized she had lived every day knowing this truth. Carrying a wound no one could see. Holding on to hope that one day the universe might return what was taken. And now, after decades, she had reached the end, and found me. Not to reclaim me. Not to start a war. Not to demand what could never be returned. But simply to see me once. To know I was alive. To touch the world where I still existed. Bitterness twisted inside me, sharp and burning, but beneath it, something softer moved. A grief older than memory. A love deeper than time. A thread that had been stretched thin but never broken. I looked at her, really looked. And saw not the stranger who sat outside my door. But the ghost of every lullaby I never heard. Every embrace I never felt. Every birthday candle she must have lit alone. And I understood, with a pain almost too large to breathe through. There are tragedies worse than death. Being forgotten is not the worst thing that can happen. The worst thing is losing someone who remembers you every day that I do not remember standing. I do not remember walking away from the table. All I remember is the world tilting, the room spinning in slow, heavy circles as though gravity had suddenly become too strong. I gripped the edge of the countertop just to stay upright, trying to swallow the rising storm inside my chest. It felt like drowning, not in water, but in truth. Bitter, burning truth. The sound of my own heartbeat roared in my ears, thick and violent. My hands shook uncontrollably. My skin felt too tight, my lungs too small. How could an entire life be rewritten in a single morning? How could everything I believed collapse so silently, as if it were nothing more than sand beneath a wave? I pressed my forehead against the cold window glass, desperately needing something steady, something real. Outside, the world continued as though nothing had changed. Cars moved, birds crossed the sky, children walked to school with backpacks bouncing behind them, unaware of the earthquake tearing through the walls of this house. People always say the truth sets you free. But they never warn that freedom begins with breaking. Behind me, I heard the soft, fragile sound of her breath catching again. Not loud, not dramatic, just the quiet breaking of someone who has run out of tears long before now. And something inside me shifted. She had lived this pain for decades. She had lived every one of these moments in slow motion. Night after night. Year after year. While I, unknowingly, lived on the other side of a wall built from lies. I turned and looked at her again. She sat very still, staring at her hands like someone who expects nothing more from the world, someone who has already lost everything that mattered and learned to survive the emptiness that follows. There was no anger in her face. No accusation. Just an exhaustion so deep it looked like surrender. She did not look like a woman seeking justice. She looked like a woman seeking peace before time ran out. For the first time, I realized something startling. She was afraid of me. Not afraid of my voice or my strength. Afraid of the possibility that I might turn away. Afraid I might say the words she had feared hearing for half a lifetime. I want nothing to do with you. The thought hit me with crushing force. How many doors had she stood outside before reaching mine? How many times had she rehearsed a story no one allowed her to speak? How many nights had she clutched those photographs to her chest, begging the universe not to let her leave the world without seeing her daughter again? A tremor ran through me, grief tangled with something warmer, heavier, unbearably tender. I walked slowly back into the room. I sat down again. And for the first time since the world cracked open, I looked straight into her eyes, really looked. What I saw there was not weakness. It was love. Weathered, broken, battered by years of loss. But still alive. Still burning. And suddenly, another truth rose inside me like dawn breaking through the darkest night. Blood does not decide family. Love does. And she had loved me every day through years I never remembered. I lowered my gaze to my hands resting in my lap, and a long, trembling breath left me. Not by choice, but because holding it any longer felt unbearable. It was then that the flood came. Not the dramatic kind, not the loud sobs shown in movies. But the silent collapse of barriers built over a lifetime. Tears spilled, slow and unstoppable, carving hot paths down my face. And I did not wipe them away. For the first time, I let myself feel everything. The grief of a child who never knew what was missing. The rage of a woman who was never told the truth. The ache of a daughter recognizing her mother's face too late. Time seemed to blur, minutes, hours, all dissolving into a single endless moment where the past and present melted into one. This house was too small to contain the weight of it, and still, we stayed there. Both of us suspended inside the quiet catastrophe of reunion. Two broken pieces of the same story, finally touching after a lifetime apart. The old woman, my mother, exhaled slowly, the sound trembling like a leaf caught in wind. Her hands tightened over each other, fingers folding inward like someone praying without hope. She looked fragile in the morning light, as though one strong breath might dissolve her completely. Her shoulders curved inward, her spine bowed slightly, the posture of someone who has carried too much for too long. And for the first time, I saw the years etched into her face not as lines of age, but as scars of love. Every wrinkle was a year she survived without me. Every tremor was a night she cried alone. Every breath was proof she never stopped waiting. I felt something shift inside my chest, something long locked away now cracking open. Forgiveness. Not the sudden kind. Not the easy kind. Not the kind that wipes away pain as though it never existed, but the quiet beginning of forgiveness. The soft ache of wanting to step closer even though the wounds still bleed. Forgiveness not for what happened, but for the years neither of us chose. I felt the weight of everything we lost. I felt the weight of everything we might still have, no matter how small the time. It was the most fragile miracle imaginable. And I understood then. Some endings are also beginnings. Some reunions come wearing the face of goodbye. And some love stories are written not in years, but in the brief, powerful moments where two souls finally recognize each other. This was one of them. The past could not be changed. But the present, this single golden moment, was ours. For the first time in my life, I felt whole. Not fixed. Not healed. Not finished. Whole, in the way broken pieces can fit when held with love. And in that quiet, trembling moment, I knew. Whatever time we had, days, weeks, months, I would not squander it. She was my mother. And I was her daughter. At last, time became heavy after that. Hours thick and slow like honey, clinging to the edges of everything they touched. The sun climbed higher in the sky, filling the living room with a warm, golden light that softened the corners of the furniture and turned dust into constellations drifting through the air. But inside my chest, everything felt fragile. As though the smallest movement might crack the world open again. My mother's hand still rested in mine, the two of us leaning into the stillness between us, breathing in the same quiet rhythm. There were no words to speak, and none were needed. Everything that language could not hold existed in the pressure of her palm, the warmth of her skin, the tremor in her fingers each time the breath caught in her throat. I could feel her strength fading. Not dramatically, not suddenly. But like a flame burning near the end of its wick. Flickering softly as though deciding whether to stay or surrender. The realization struck with aching clarity. Time was short. I felt the fear rise again, sharp and wild, but I held it down gently. The way you cradle a bird trembling inside your hands. Panic could steal what precious moments remained. But stillness could hold them carefully. allowing each second to stretch and breathe. For the first time in my life, I wished to freeze time. To hold her hand forever. To keep the sun from moving across the sky. To steal hours from the future and pour them into this morning like water into cracked soil. But time is never ours to command. It moves, with or without permission. The weight of that truth settled heavily in my chest, yet beneath it grew something unexpected. A tenderness deeper and stronger than fear. She had given everything she had left simply to reach me. So now, whatever time remained, I would honor it. I sat with her as the morning became afternoon. Stroking gently the back of her hand with my thumb. Memorizing every line of her face. Every fragile breath. And as the light shifted and lengthened, something inside me began to soften. The rigid anger, the confusion. The jagged edges of betrayal. They did not vanish. But they loosened their grip. Making space for something gentler to grow. The past could not be undone. But the present, even if brief, could be sacred. For the first time, I let myself wonder about the years we lost, not with rage, but with mourning. I pictured birthdays with one chair empty. Holidays with one gift unopened. Quiet nights where her hands reached into darkness hoping to touch someone who was not there. Grief pressed heavy against my ribs, but I did not push it away. It belonged here. A witness to the depth of what was taken. And the depth of what still remained. Outside, the sky clouded over. And a soft drizzle began to fall, rain like whispered prayers tapping gently at the windows. The world shifted into silence. And in that silence, something inside me opened. A small, quiet doorway. To forgiveness. Not complete. Not perfect. But real. Perhaps forgiveness does not begin in grand declarations or sudden absolution. Perhaps it begins in the smallest gesture. A hand held in quiet morning light. Time slipped by, and I felt her body grow heavier against the cushions, her breathing slower, shallower, each inhale taking longer to arrive, each exhale fading like a wave retreating across sand. The fear surged again, gripping my throat. Shallow, choking, frantic. But I tightened my hand around hers gently, letting her feel the steadiness I didn't feel. Hoping that my heartbeat beneath her fingertips might guide her back. I wanted sleep to take her gently. But not like this. Not now. Not before I was ready. Yet readiness is a luxury few are granted. And then, a breath. A long, trembling breath. Followed by stillness. Not the stillness of rest. The stillness of endings. I felt the world tilt. The air shifted, heavy and thin. My heart stuttered painfully inside my chest. The house around us held its breath. Her hand lay in mine. Warm for a moment longer. Then slowly cooling. My body folded inward, crushed beneath the weight of another truth too heavy to hold. She had come to me. Found me. Touched my hand. And left this world. In the place where she finally felt she could stop searching. And I, for the second time in my life, lost my mother. But this time, I knew the truth. She did not leave me. She arrived. And she stayed. Until love was spoken without words. The hours after her passing moved strangely. Slow and blurred, dripping through my fingers like water, impossible to grasp. I sat beside her body long after the room grew cold, unwilling to break the fragile stillness that held us together. The storm outside grew stronger. Rain striking the windows like quiet applause for a life lived in love and loss. I felt empty and overflowing all at once. A paradox I could not name. What do you do when the moment you waited your whole life to feel arrives at the same time it ends? There is no ceremony for grief like this. No gentle path forward. Only the task of breathing. One aching breath at a time. Eventually, I rose, not because I wanted to, but because life insists on continuing even when we wish it wouldn't. I found the letter she had placed in my hand the night before. The paper worn soft at the edges, folded so many times the creases were nearly transparent. I held it tightly against my chest but did not open it. Not yet. Some truths demand the courage of tomorrow. I covered her gently with a blanket, knowing it was not to keep her warm, but because love needs gestures, even when they come too late. And then, with hands trembling so violently I could barely hold the switch, I turned on the porch light. Just as she had waited for me all these years, I would now keep that light burning for her. A promise carved into the air. Days passed, slow and heavy. The world moved on while I stood still, learning how to breathe inside the new shape of my life. A shape carved by both gain and loss. I buried her beneath a tree near the edge of the cemetery. A place where the wind hummed softly through the leaves, like a lullaby carried on breeze. There was no crowd, no speeches, no grand display. Just two hands touching the earth, and a heart breaking quietly beneath a gray sky. I placed fresh flowers there. And then, after a long moment, I placed the yellow blanket from the photograph beside them. The same one she had held me in. The circle closed itself. Healing does not come all at once. It arrives in fragments. The way sunrise returns by degrees, softening darkness slowly. I will carry questions forever. I will carry grief longer still. But beneath it all now lives something far stronger. Love. That outlived distance, outlasted lies, and learned how to return home. Every night, I sit on the same steps where she waited for me, and I turn on the porch light. Not because I expect her shadow to appear again, but because love deserves a light left burning, even when the one we wait for has already gone. And some nights, in the quiet, when the world settles into sleep, I feel her near me. Not in body, not in voice, but in the soft warmth blooming beneath my ribs. The kind of presence that needs no proof. The kind of love that does not leave when breath does. A love that stays.